That is what came out today at a report from the Pentagon. It's a detailed 63-page report. The Pentagon's agency responsible for identifying UFOs put it out. They say there's no proof of a top-secret government program or has there been any reverse engineering of objects of non-human origin. That was the bombshell claim, remember, of that alleged program that was first made right here on News Nation by the former intelligence officer David Grush. Today, News Nation's Joe Khalil from the Capitol with us tonight. So I gave kind of the headline, right, Joe? But I know you took a deeper dive into this report. What did you find?
Yeah, so the big takeaways are this. Like, the top findings are the Pentagon says there's no evidence to support the claims that the United States has ever had possession of basically alien aircraft. And they also say there's no evidence to show there were any programs that the government was running or that any private corporations were running to reverse engineer extraterrestrial technology. That is the big takeaway from the report. Now, it also is pretty dismissive of the claims, but people like David Grush, people who have very high-level clearance at different times, were read into high-level top-secret programs who've said these things do exist. The Pentagon's report says those claims are not necessarily lies, but what the report claims is that maybe those people who have been saying those things were given facts, were given information that was misconstrued, misunderstood, little pieces of facts that were taken out of context and mistaken for other things. That's what the report contends. But I got to say, there is a lot of pushback already from some of those people we've been speaking to who are at very high level intelligence and very high level classification. They say that they don't necessarily feel like everything in this report is accurate. They also say that some of it was, they think, intentionally misleading. So that has been the response in part. Now, a couple of really interesting things, Connell, within the report. One is they do acknowledge that there are things in our airspace that they simply cannot explain. The way they move, the way they function, the report calls those things anomalous. So that's a bit concerning there. The other part is they actually did concede in the report, and it's right there in black and white, that the Department of Defense did actually stand up a classified program, at least one, there are others that were alleged, that was intended to reverse engineer UAPs. They say they ended those programs, again, classified, because there were no UAPs to reverse engineer, or so says the report. And they went on to say that there was never any fruit that was born from those classified programs, so they were ultimately stopped. But our producer, Tanya, went to the Pentagon today and actually asked about those, saying, why did you create those programs at all if there were no UAPs there? And here's the response that she got.
As you highlight, no verifiable evidence that any UAP sighting represented extraterrestrial activity, that the U.S. government or private industry has ever had access to extraterrestrial technology, or that any information was illegally or inappropriately withheld from Congress.
So again, the Pentagon pretty firmly saying these claims, there's nothing there. But, you know, the report itself, pretty interesting as you read the details of it.
Yeah, and then we'll wait for volume 2, right, Joe? All right, thank you, Joe Khalil, there live at the Capitol. We did that News Nation interview with David Grush to put the story front and center for us. Joining us right now, special correspondent Ross Coulthard. All right, Ross, I'm just going to give you the floor on this because you know far more about this than, well, certainly than me, but anybody else. This report, the headline, as Joe says, basically no evidence of aliens or any kind of a cover-up of aliens. You say what?
Good evening, Connell. Well, firstly, I don't think anybody's surprised that the Pentagon is making a pronouncement like this. I'm talking to multiple people tonight, people inside the legacy retrieval program, reverse engineering program that is being secretly operated by people within the US government and private aerospace who hoot with laughter at this feeble attempt by the Pentagon to try and stop the issue being discussed any further. We know for a fact that the Inspector General of the intelligence community, that is the oversight body for the intelligence community, separately from the Pentagon, has made a determination that David Grush's complaints are credible and urgent. And that's why they were referred to the Congress for investigation.
Right.
And I was only just recently in Washington talking to senior staffers, senior congressional representatives, and senior senators. And by golly, they are not letting go of this just because the Pentagon makes a pronouncement that it's not true. They know it's true. They have first-hand witnesses who've testified about it, who didn't go to AARO, to the Defense Department, because frankly, Connell, they didn't trust them. And that's the problem. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the person who created this report, it's alleged by the people I've been talking to that he set out with a preconceived agenda. And I can reveal here tonight that I've found out some of the members of a special secret advisory committee that Dr. Kirkpatrick used to advise him in the preparation of that report. I have their names, I have their roles, I know who they are. They are the gatekeepers, believe it or not, to this legacy program. They were quite literally pulling the strings on this AARO report. And people are so angry, so bitterly angry with this feeble attempt at a cover-up that they are now leaking more assiduously to people like me, and more importantly, whistleblowers are becoming more compelled to come forward and give evidence about what they know. And if I can just make one further point.
Okay.
There is an executive order under your President Ronald Reagan, God bless him, back in the 1980s, this executive order 12333 banned covert actions by the US intelligence community against the American public, designed to influence American public opinion or media commentary. Now, the allegation that we now have on the books is a constitutional crisis for the United States, because you have two separate arms of government. You have the ICIG, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, saying it's true, and you've got no comment right now from the Director of National Intelligence, and you've got the Pentagon claiming it's not true. So who's lying?
What about the evidence of the program, the reverse engineering program I'm talking about? Because the way they phrased it in their description from the Pentagon was that there was no verifiable evidence for claims the U.S. government and private companies have access to or have been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. So they say there's no verifiable evidence. Is there?
The word is verifiable.
Right.
And the issue is, did AARO have the will and the powers to actually kick the doors in and go and do the investigating? That didn't happen. Even the aerospace bosses who claim in the report that they've got no knowledge of extraterrestrial technology or a reverse engineering program, they haven't formally been put under oath and asked to testify under the oath that would make them commit perjury if they were lying. There's been no attempt proactively by AARO, because they don't have the power to do this, to go into these facilities, the addresses of which, the locations of which were given to them by David Grush and other witnesses. They haven't made those inquiries. So frankly, Connell, I'm sorry to be rude to the Pentagon, but they're a complete joke on this.
Lou Elizondo and Gary Nolan react to the AARO historical report. Okay, yeah, I just had to make another video talking about this because there's some pretty juicy stuff. Okay, but check this out. We have an exclusive statement, says Matt Ford from the Good Trouble Show, from former director of ATIP Lou Elizondo regarding today's Pentagon AARO UAP report created under the leadership of former director, the lovely Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. It is inconceivable, says Lou, that the Pentagon continues to go down this road of obfuscation and denial. Our adversaries have already stated for the record they have their own UAP programs. Is this not important to the Pentagon? The report is not only inaccurate, but also misleading in many of its assertions. Furthermore, this is yet another example of a long list of missteps by the Pentagon in recent history. It's a sad day for democracy when the American public is being fed misinformation under the guise of truthfulness and transparency. Well, it wouldn't be good misinformation if it wasn't under the guise of truthfulness. than this. But here's a partial list of the media outlets spreading this disinformation. The Washington Post, The News, Politico, Newsweek, CNN, all running with this garbage. Pentagon report finds no evidence of alien visitors or hidden spacecraft. UFOs in storage. Findings about alien technology from exhausted Pentagon review. U.S. once considered a program to reverse engineer alien spacecraft, Pentagon report reveals. But of course, the follow up is that they discontinued it, according to AARO, right? Kona Blue or whatever it was called. Newsweek, new declassified UFO information revealed by Pentagon and then debunked. CNN, U.S. military developing portable UFO detection kits as Pentagon says no evidence of alien tech found. Now, all these major outlets are running with this disinformation. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's not surprising, but it's disgusting. Gary Nolan isn't happy about it either. He says, keep doing the work in science we are already doing. The DoD report states only conclusions and provides no data and no definitions of what they were trying to do in the first place. It's a piece of paper dipped in Teflon whose only calorie count is the paper itself, with the report containing no nutritional value. I love that. The AARO report contains no nutritional value. I love it. And it really doesn't. It also doesn't bode well for the new director or the interim director of AARO. If he allowed this to get out there and he's not denouncing it, then he's obviously part of the problem. So are we going to get a new director of AARO? Are we going to get a Carl Nell or somebody in that at least admits the existence of UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering, if nothing else? I would love to get Tim Gallaudet in there, somebody like that, who's actually talking about contact and interaction with the beings. How likely is that going to happen? Probably not that likely. I can dream. Okay.
Pentagon released a report this morning that really just seems like a political ruse. It really does. After an extensive government investigation, they found no evidence that extraterrestrials have visited Earth or that the government has alien spacecraft in its possession. But the report, so what the report does is directly refute what whistleblowers have said. But they don't give any context for their reckonings. And I'm not playing to the syllogy that you can't prove the non-existence of a fact. How do they prove that there isn't any of these things? By telling you who they spoke to and in what areas and what are these programs and what are these operations. But they didn't do any of that. And they didn't even invite News Nation. Let's ask News Nation special correspondent and investigative journalist Ross Colhart and one of those UFO whistleblowers, former Navy pilot Lieutenant Ryan Graves. Ryan, I start with you. As somebody who served this country and who has no interest in getting involved in all this stink in the first place, what did you make of the reports today?
Well, the report today was disappointing on multiple levels. Primarily for me, when I see that report come out and the language that it used and the way that the media was kind of brought together to not really tell the full story, for me, read as a way to discourage other whistleblowers and other pilots from coming forward in order to report on these cases. For me, that's especially concerning. This is something that is happening now. This is something that pilots are experiencing now. And this type of language only hurts the reporting mechanisms that AARO is charged with implementing.
Ross, you know the same way I do that a lot of the media love this conclusion for the Pentagon because they don't really care about this story or they dismiss it as nonsense. I'm sure you hear it all the time. So do I. What do you think this was about today, and did it make you change your reckoning of what the situation is?
G'day, Chris. This was all about putting a stake through the heart of continued investigation into the UAP mystery. It was a feeble attempt, I believe, by the Pentagon to try and shut this issue down, a kind of Condon Report 2.0. The simple fact is that we now have two arms of the US government, the US intelligence community and the Defense Department, saying different things about the same mystery. The US intelligence community's oversight body, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, gave evidence to Congress earlier this year where basically they confirmed David Grush's allegations as credible and urgent. And frankly, that's at odds with what the Defense Department is saying here. And the reason why, it's very simple. The witnesses didn't come forward to the extent that they have done to Congress to AARO. And moreover, the ones that did come forward to AARO, the Pentagon's UFO Investigation Office, they weren't treated fairly. Their allegations were dismissed. There really wasn't the power or, frankly, the will inside AARO, the Pentagon, to investigate this properly. And they didn't even have the power to go and look at these facilities. It boils down, Chris, to the very simple procedure of them literally picking up the phone, organising a meeting with these aerospace companies and with these military officials and saying, hey guys, do you know about a reverse engineering program? Are you aware of any retrievals? You're not? Okay, guys, thanks very much. We trust you.
Right.
Thanks very much. Goodbye. It really is, when you read the body of the report, it is mindless, breathtaking, just how naive they have been to think that we're all going to believe this piffle.
Ryan, are you going to back off?
Well, no, absolutely not. And I don't think the public is either. A report like this is not going to satisfy the public's curiosity on this topic. We're not stupid.
Right.
The public's not stupid. We understand when we're being misdirected, when we're not having enough information brought forward. It's clear that transparency is not part of the equation for them.
Yeah, and they're getting a pass from the media on it now also by picking their friends. Ryan Graves, thank you very much. Ross Colhart, as always, I'm here for it. I'm all about the transparency, and I am not satisfied. And I did note that they're talking about alien spacecraft. They're talking about proof that extraterrestrials were here, as if that's the sum total of the phenomena. It's really, those are the minority things. There's so much more that people see all the time and want to know about that they spend money on. So they must be spending money for a reason. Gentlemen, to be continued.
You need to seriously look into all this and report back to us. And today, we finally have seen the first report due to Congress that details the history of UFOs and the United States government and a whole bunch of classified government programs dating all the way back to the 1940s. Their conclusion, no evidence of crash retrievals. But that conclusion doesn't tell the whole story. Here's a quick recap of how we got here. Tonight, 8 months after that out-of-this-world testimony on Capitol Hill.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human. The official word from the Pentagon, no dead alien bodies, no crashed alien craft, and no government cover-up. In a 63-page report, the DoD's UAP office saying they've interviewed more than 30 people, including heads of aerospace companies, CIA and defense officials, and found no credible first-hand information supporting the claims.
Any validity to any of the crash retrieval talk that was presented to Congress, or the fact that the United States may have, alien craft?
Yeah, we've seen absolutely no evidence of that to date.
Also detailed the government's long history with UFOs going back to the 40s, even touching on former President Bill Clinton's interest in Roswell. But the DoD insisting that was a mix of confusion over high-altitude test dummies, fatal plane crashes, and a program to detect nukes.
What we found is that claims of hidden programs are largely the result of circular reporting by a small group, repeating what they heard from others.
But when it comes to some of the recent mysteries involving pilots or surveillance video, the report was short on specifics. The report's response to the UFO hype, a long list of earthly explanations, saying there was no evidence of extraterrestrials, but a small percentage of cases had potentially anomalous characteristics or concerning characteristics. Anomalous and concerning, a.k.a. a lot of those big question marks are still out there. So let's bring in Ryan Graves, a former Navy pilot and the co-founder of the Americans for Safe Aerospace. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us again. We were talking a little bit earlier. Does this report address what you and your squadron were seeing flying out there on the East Coast?
Oh, no. This report that was released by the AARO office is a historical look going back to about 1940 and onward. The cases that we experienced in the 2014 to 2015 period off the coast of Virginia Beach and Florida were not addressed, and we still don't know what those objects were. Reports are still coming in from the Eastern Seaboard and elsewhere that pilots are experiencing objects today now that we're not really sure what they are, and they have been demonstrating, as this report used, concerning performance characteristics.
And Ryan, as I understand it, there are two reports that are due to Congress. One was supposed to look at things that happened from the 1940s to 2023. Your incidents fall into that. The Nimitz incident in 2004 off the coast of California, that falls into that. I didn't see anything about that in the report. Is there any possibility that what you saw may be addressed in the next report that's supposed to come out?
That's a possibility, but you're absolutely right. It does not include any of the more modern cases that have been traditionally considered unexplained. In the 2018 time period, if we recall, or excuse me, 2017 period, there was a couple of videos that were released by the New York Times, one labeled the Gimbal and another the Go Fast. These were the cases on the Eastern Seaboard, and there it is there, that still remain unexplained at this time.
And Brian, you know, how quickly the public forgets, but you were there the day that Grush testified. I remember there were two different issues brought to Congress that day that we were watching for. One, the testimony of you and other pilots like David Fravor about seeing things in the sky that you couldn't explain. And then there was this whole crash retrieval stuff. And the way I remember it, as soon as people heard someone tell Congress about like non-biologics, it almost seemed like whatever had been happening now was totally overshadowed by what may have happened or may not have happened in the past. Do you think that's kind of what's happening in this report?
I do agree with that. You know, it's disappointing. The language in this report is really detrimental to people that want to come forward, witnesses, potential whistleblowers, and also commercial and military pilots that are dealing with this and are fighting through the stigma in order to report these cases. There is pending legislation now within Congress in order to enable pilots, commercial pilots, to be able to report on UAP without fear of repercussions. And you can learn more about that at safeaerospace.org. But this type of report, all it does is diminish the conversation, and it does not leave many options for pilots that have to deal with this now.
That's really interesting, kind of ironic, because like so much of this was about reducing the stigma of just being able to talk about seeing something weird and trying to figure out what it was. I know this is just volume one of what's due to Congress. What comes next based on the people that you've been talking to?
Well, we have to remember the headlines on this story aren't necessarily telling the full report. In the report, it also does mention that they are taking care to be able to deploy sensors at various bases to better understand what the UAP are. So in one hand, they are dismissing the historical context and any potential illegal programs. However, they are taking care to invest in the technology so we can better understand this going forward. So to answer your question, I think the government will likely continue to investigate this, and I encourage the public to keep the pressure on as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up. For me, that's the most fascinating thing, the gremlins, these Pelican cases that, from what we understand, the DOD has been testing out. They're packing them full of sensors, and these are supposed to be rapidly deployed to any hotspot of UFO activity. And that's something that we know is going to happen. What kind of sensors, what will they be looking for?
Yeah, I think, you know, what they'll be looking for, what we call things outside the normal pattern of life. Using hyperspectral sensors, you can look outside the normal visual range, and you have the potential to be able to see objects that are moving or producing energies that we would otherwise not normally be able to see optically. And so by putting these sensors out there, they have the opportunity to catch some of these UAP in action and potentially better understand what they are. It is a problem right now. We do not have the proper reporting mechanisms. The ICIG has said that themselves. And so as we continue to better understand what this is, I think that AARO should leave the door open to at least understanding what these are without putting assumptions about their locations, such as being off-world or potentially extraterrestrial. We can all agree that there's something there and it's responsible for us to be able to know what's flying over our heads within the United States.
And if you would just level with me, from what you've seen, do you think this is part of a cover-up, or do you think AARO is truly interested in getting to the bottom of all this?
Well, I think if they were truly interested in getting to the bottom of this, there would be more resources and more time put forward in order to understand the historical context. Ultimately, the only way that people are going to be satisfied with the answer that's given by the Pentagon, AARO, or another office is if there's transparency around the conversation. That's good governance, and we haven't seen that yet.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill. So nothing to see here. That is essentially the takeaway from a new Pentagon report about UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It rebuts claims made by David Grush, the career intelligence official who told News Nation in an exclusive interview last year that, as he claims, the U.S. government has secretly been in possession of non-human spacecraft or non-human materials. But today, the Pentagon's report shut those claims down. Here was the press secretary, Pat Ryder, earlier today.
So what we found is that claims of hidden programs are largely the result of circular reporting by a small group repeating what they heard from others, and that many people have sincerely misinterpreted real events or mistaken sensitive U.S. programs as UAP or being extraterrestrial exploitation.
All right, joining us now, News Nation special correspondent Ross Coulthart and investigative journalist Bryce Zabel. Ross, Bryce, hello to you both. Come on in. Ross, we'll start with you. Pentagon says, you know what? You don't, nothing there.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But the simple fact is, the simple fact is, I've been talking extensively to people inside that legacy crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, and as confronting as it may sound to this audience, it really is the case that there is a covert program that's been in operation now for decades. It's been kept secret by a very small cadre of people within the Pentagon and the intelligence community. And the big question to me really is, was AARO misled? Was the Pentagon's UFO body misled? Or did it not have the power to properly investigate? Because I don't think it did. It certainly didn't go and kick the doors in Area 51. It didn't go and look inside the caves of Groom Lake. There's been no active, proactive effort to get out into the field. As far as I can see, all they've done is picked up a phone and politely asked the bosses of Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, I say, guys, do you have a flying saucer in your basement? Oh, you don't. Terribly sorry to trouble you. We'll move on. It's not good enough, and nobody's buying it.
Bryce, here was part of the report that caught my attention, and
Sure.
it led to a lot of questions. It's lengthy. Stick with me. It says AARO, the body that Ross talks about, assesses that all of the named and described alleged hidden UAP reverse engineering programs provided by interviewees either do not exist, are misidentified authentic national security programs that are not related to extraterrestrial technology exploitation, or resolve to a disestablished program. What does that mean when they're talking about a disestablished program or a misidentified national security program?
Well, the interesting thing is if you actually read the 60 pages, and I doubt very many people have so far today, and we're probably doing what we're doing based on the executive summary, but by disestablished programs, they go through at great length to talk about the various investigations the government has had. Most of them have been disestablished over time. I guess we're talking about the ones that Ross is talking about, where you say, okay, something actually is going on. And Ross and I certainly know about people who say that they either worked on those programs or know very much about them. But I think the really interesting thing about this is the report, as I read it, says over and over, basically, as you put it, nothing to see here. But the interesting thing is, in going to the great lengths that it goes to say so many of these things are easily explained, is hardly news. Ross and I would agree with that 100%. These things are the kind of things that have been explained over and over. It's the 2 to 3% that haven't been explained historically through all the programs they've talked about. Those are the ones where they should be looking into those cases, because those are people that have seen craft. These are commercial pilots, military pilots, police officers, government officials.
Right.
There's a whole lot of things here that they're just saying nothing to see here, and they're tarnishing the whole group of witnesses on this.